Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Jonathan and I am a software developer who looks at tech companies for investors, and today I'm going to be having a look at Zscaler. I'm going to try and explain Zscaler in a non-technical way so that you as an investor have a better understanding of how it works and how it makes its money. And then I'll look at its kind of most up-to-date finances. Then I'll give you my final thoughts on Zscaler from the point of view of a tech guy and also kind of from the point of view of an investor. So to start, we're going to kind of look at what Zscaler is. And for you to kind of understand what Zscaler is, you need to have a kind of really basic understanding of how the internet works. And I'm going to try and explain that. So the internet is just devices that connect together, and an example of that would be that your mobile phone or your computer that you are currently on connects to your router, and then the router then connects it to another server somewhere, and then that links to YouTube, which you are on just now. But the really basic kind of understanding of that would be your device connects to a server that hosts this video, and then that information is sent over the network back to, well, your device. The point is that you actually have an active connection to another device on the same network. And in this case, it's your mobile phone or desktop connecting to the server that hosts this video. Now, this video is a publicly accessible video, which means that you can actively connect to this video over the internet on a public network. But there's other types of networks. You also have private networks, and private networks relate a bit more to kind of business infrastructure. Now, there are lots of different examples of private networks, but probably the ones that most people can relate to are the ones that they may have experienced in school. So that could have been college, high school, or even primary school. You might have had specific websites or applications that you could only use if you were on a machine inside of your university or inside a specific building. Now, these are examples of kind of private networks. And the whole point of a private network is that the resources on that network are only accessible by machines that are connected to that network. This actually has quite a lot of advantages. It's to do with security. It also has to do with keeping resources that are specific and sensitive on a specific network so that people that you don't want to be able to access it can't access it. Now, that is really how it used to be. But as that kind of move away from having physical locations where you actually have to be to access this private network, people are still needing to be able to access this private network even if they can't actually be in that physical location. So businesses and colleges in this sense, or schools in this sense, have started to move this kind of physical infrastructure that you used to have onto the cloud. And rather than having a private network in a specific location, you have a virtual private network, which I'm pretty sure you probably heard of before because it is VPN. Virtual private network. So you have all these companies and organizations moving from a physical infrastructure location to an online one, and people who need to access this network can access it via the internet. All they have to do is connect through a VPN, and they can just have an IP address assigned to them. And I will explain what an IP address is. So an IP address is pretty much just like the address on your house or where you live. It is a way to identify a particular location, or in the case of the internet, it is a way to identify a particular machine. So when a machine joins a network, it is automatically assigned an IP address so that every other machine in the network knows what machine is connected to it. So as soon as this machine connects to the network, it is, well, a location that can be found. And it can also find this location on the network. Now, once you have these machines on the network, then it is the responsibility of the administrator to manage and allow access to different resources on this network per device. Now, depending on what servers you have on this network, you can allocate the resources through policies and groups. But that is another kind of layer of it. You don't really need to know about that. If you have a very simple and basic VPN, as soon as a machine joins your network, then they pretty much have access to all other machines and resources on that network. Now, even if they don't have access to all of the resources on the network, there's still quite a lot they could do. They can see all of the machines that are currently on the network and connected. They can also perform malicious actions, from denial of service to adding something to the network that could pretty much cause harm to a particular device. And for some companies, managing the resources and also knowing who has access to your resources over which network they are accessing your resources is quite a lot of hassle. And that is where Zscaler comes in, because rather than having a device directly access your network, Zscaler kind of acts like a middleman. So when a device tries to access your network, they access it through Zscaler, which is like an application. And this application acts like a portal. So when you connect to this network, you never actually physically connect to the network. You're not a device that's added to the network. You just log into Zscaler, and then Zscaler accesses the resources on this network and kind of gives you what you're allowed back. Now, this saves quite a lot of hassle in a few ways. Because the device isn't actively added to the network, it can't view anything on the network that it's not allowed to, or it might not be allowed to. The other advantage is, for an administrator, it's a lot easier to set permissions to particular resources on the network. Because it all goes through kind of one portal, through Zscaler, then they don't really need to kind of fiddle about with different machines on the network to say who can access this machine, who can access this machine, who can access this machine. You just use Zscaler to kind of manage all that for you. And then lastly, the kind of main other advantage is the fact that it allows administrators and kind of company owners to monitor the network traffic a lot better. So when a particular user is trying to access a resource on the network, then Zscaler can offer quite a lot of information. It can see who has been on a particular application and for how long and for what they were using it for. Whereas with a conventional VPN, it's quite hard information to get out. You know which device is connected to your VPN and when, but you can't monitor what applications they use that easily. You can't monitor which different applications and how long they were on it for. You only really know that they access your network. So Zscaler offers a way for companies and organizations to kind of mitigate a lot of risk with allowing users to access their network, and also allows them to monitor a lot easier the users who are accessing their network. So there are quite a lot of advantages to using Zscaler. Now I'm going to go and have a look at its kind of revenue. So we're going to start with the stock price. Currently trading around $169 per share. It has a 52-week range of $57.7 to $230.8. Its market cap's around $23 billion, and it has an earnings per share of negative $1.45 per share. Now, over the past 5 days, it's had quite a steep decline in value. Same again over the past month. The past 6 months, it was climbing up until around February 2021. The past year, it's been on a steady increase up until around February 2021, which I think was about the time when everything started to kind of crash. So looking at it over its max, from about 12th of March 2018 to now, it's been progressively climbing up. Here we have Zscaler's kind of most up-to-date revenue that I could find, which is for the second fiscal quarter of 2021. Revenue growth 55% year over year to 157 million. In terms of cash and cash equivalents, they have 1.444.7 billion as of January 31st, 2021, which is an increase of 74.2 million from July the year previous. So looking at the financial outlook for the third quarter of fiscal 2021, they expect total revenue of 162 to 164 million, And for the full fiscal 2021, they expect total revenue of 634 million to 638 million. Now, actually having a look at their revenue when you compare January 31st, 2020 to January 31st, 2021, they had an increase of revenue by almost about 105 million, which is pretty good. And their cost of revenue relative to that actually reduced quite a bit as well. So when we look at the revenue and we look at the revenue compared to the cost of revenue leading up to January 31st, 2020, their cost of revenue was about 20.4% of their revenue. But when you compare the cost of revenue to the revenue of leading up to the 6 months leading up to January 31st in 2021, their cost of revenue was 21.9%. Now that is quite concerning. I don't know why they had the increase in cost of revenue, but to be fair to them, when you subtract the kind of non-flexible costs of their sales and marketing and research and development, when you look at 2020, their general and administrative costs, when you take that as a percentage of their gross profit, it's about 26.8%, which is quite high. But when you look at their gross profit and you compare the percentage of their general and administrative costs relative to their gross profit for 2021, it's only about 19.5%. So even though they had that percentage increase when you compare the cost of revenue to the revenue, they had a reduction in terms of their general and administrative costs relative to their revenue, relative to their gross profit. And if we actually subtract the general and administrative costs from their gross profit, they still end up with 188.248 million, which is about 62.8% of, their entire revenue. So if you were to subtract the non-flexible costs of sales and marketing and research and development, they would end up with kind of a profit margin of about 62.8%. Subtracting any other costs, those are the kind of margins that you can calculate from this, which actually altogether is quite promising. Now, as a software developer, I actually quite like the idea of Zscaler. There are kind of some issues I have with it, but I'll kind of go into that. In terms of what it offers and what it offers system admins the ability to do, being able to control and monitor who and what has access to your network is pretty invaluable. VPNs can be quite hard to manage and maintain, especially when you have different users accessing through different networks, and when you're adding or removing a machine from the system with resources on it, then you might have to kind of reallocate and reassign permissions, which can be a bit of a pain. So with Zscaler, this is a bit different. All you actually have to do is add the machine onto the network, give Zscaler access to this machine, and then with Zscaler, you control who actually has permission to access the resources on this machine. So it sort of acts like a middleman, and it does quite a lot of the security stuff for you. And if you're moving your infrastructure to the cloud, you can continue to use Zscaler to, move infrastructure. Because if you have a physical location where you have all your servers, maybe you want to move that onto the cloud. And rather than having to faff about with all of those machines and all of that equipment, you can just use Zscaler to kind of make the transition a little bit easier. Now, I do have a couple of issues with Zscaler, but it's just kind of my personal issues. VPNs are kind of really commonplace, and most of the time, if you actually have a decent network engineer, they can manage the infrastructure quite well, and security is, a given with that. For large corporations, being able to monitor all of your employees and who actually has access and when they are accessing applications is quite a good thing. But if you're a smaller kind of development team, it kind of gives the impression that you actually don't trust the people who work on the teams, because you're monitoring how long they have access to particular applications in your network, and you pretty much monitor their entire network traffic within your network. which is good in a sense. It does keep your network safe, which is priority number one. But you also actually have to kind of realize how that can come across to the people who are using your network. It's called no trust access, and in that sense, it kind of is no trust. No trust in the sense that you can access it because you don't really need to be a trusted user, you just access it through Zscaler's application. But it's also no trust in the sense that it doesn't really give trust between the person who is hiring the developers or the people who are accessing the network and the people using the network, which is fine and relatable, and I can understand that completely. This is just my kind of personal opinion on it. Now, as an investor, Zscaler actually seems like quite a good company. Now, there are some kind of questionable things and things that I wouldn't really be kind of sure about in terms of why their cost of revenues went up, but their general and administrative has went down. And for large corporations, Zscaler is really good, but for smaller companies, it might not really be that practical, and most of the time a VPN is good enough. So yeah, I am a little bit torn about Zscaler, but it does show all the signs of being a really promising company. It's shown really good growth over the past, year, and its revenue and cost of revenue seems to be going in the right direction. If you mitigate the kind of difference between the increase in cost of revenue with the reduction in the percentage of the general and administrative costs, it's pretty good. But please bear in mind that nothing in this information is meant to come across as investing advice. Don't base any buying or selling decisions on the content of this video. If you did like the video, I would really appreciate if you hit that like button. It helps this channel grow and I just really appreciate it. If you also want to have a look at some of my other videos, or there's some other companies that you are interested in, then maybe I've already made a video about it, or if you would like me to make a video about it, then comment it down below and let me know. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night or morning, whatever time it is where you are from, and I will see you next time. Thank you.